Welcome everybody. I'm Sharad Mahajan. I'm a treasurer of INHAF and its founding member. Well, INHAF started way back in late 90s. It's an umbrella organization. It's an NGO registered as a society, as a trust, as an NGO. And we have members which are actually ground level working NGOs from different parts of India. We also have professionals, researchers as a member. And this umbrella organization has been working basically on different policies and supporting their members in the various project activities they are doing. Now, this organization is headed by Kirti Shah, who has been working in this field for donkey number of years, and he will be summing up the the webinar. We are very happy to welcome you for this 32nd webinar on the series, because we thought of doing this series to address the issues related to urbanization. And as you all are aware that urbanization
Sharad sir, we lost you.
Oh, sorry. I don't know.
Yeah, we can hear you now. Please continue.
Yeah, okay. So we are doing this series of webinar to reassess India's urban challenges, then rethink of Indian cities, and formulating the responses to the context of national development. Huge agenda. Basically, we feel. Hello, I hope you are getting me.
Yes, but yeah, please
Video is
continue.
not there. Okay, I'm sorry. But with these huge challenges, we have taken very different themes about transportation, about housing, about pollution, and now these days we are talking about the slums particularly. Now, this particular webinar is earlier two webinars were about the cooperative housing, particularly related to talking about their side of the story, and will advise us on the cooperative societies of slum dwellers. I hand it over to Sandeep of Hunnarshala, who will be anchoring it, and then we have the uh, number of guests who will be giving the details. Over to you, Sandeep.
Thank you, Sharad, and welcome to all of you once again. I hope you all have enjoyed our interaction with Uruguay day before yesterday. Today we have a scintillating session for you from Switzerland, and of course it's going to be interspersed with lots of music and films and a lot of very interesting interactions. So let me introduce to you Hunnarshala. We have Hunnarshala Foundation has been for the last couple of decades been working on primarily urban building, green buildings, and along with that we run an exhaustive education program for both artisans as well as architects and engineers. We the reason why one of our biggest engagements is with the whole issue of housing. We started a couple of decades ago with post-disaster reconstruction work, and ever since then we have been helping many governments, both India and abroad, to design their policies, design their programs for post-disaster reconstruction. We pioneered with the World Bank and the UN the entire process of owner-driven reconstruction, which they have been taking forward in other places as well now. We have worked a lot. We've been advocating for the last 15, 20 years on getting the governments to recognize that in rural housing, the social housings should be allowed and permitted to build in the natural materials, the green materials and technologies that this civilization has developed over hundreds of years. And whether it is in mud or bamboo or stone, we finally 3 years ago were able to do that. There was a large program where more than 250 typologies were recognized by the government for the first time. We have been working in the area of slums for some time now, and probably that is the most difficult area of housing. We have been able to set up a few examples, but we are constantly faced with this, very two different civilizational values that clash together, one of privatization and one of the commons. And through our entire experience in housing, we have learned three things. One, that people know how to make their own houses. This whole thing that only engineers and architects and bureaucrats can build houses is completely false. India still continues to build all its cities with the so to speak unlettered people who come from our villages and build our cities for us. So there is no reason why they cannot build for themselves. We don't need contractors and developers to do it for them. The second thing we have learned is that they have developed a very evolved vocabulary of green buildings. And we will do much better by quickly recognizing a lot of these techniques that they have developed for the future of the world. The third thing that we have learned is that women play a very important role in being able to get people together and get consensus. They know how to nurture decision making, unlike men, let me say that as well. And the faster we give them the responsibility of getting our slums back into proper housing situations, I think we'll do a much better job. We are very excited to have today some of the best people in Switzerland who have been pioneering cooperative housing for the last 100 years or so. So we are here to listen. We are here to learn from you, because the India's cooperative movement in housing has lost its way. We still continue to have a vibrant cooperative movement in the milk or in agricultural produce, but as far as housing is concerned, we are struggling. So these two webinars that we have organized is really to listen to you, to learn from you. So over to you now, Uday.
Good evening, everyone. Without further ado, I'll try to introduce Bhavna, who will recite a poem she just wrote yesterday and day before. Bhavna is an architect, writer, and researcher based in Mumbai. She works in projects that seek to improve the built habitat of one of the most marginalized communities in urban areas of India. She is deeply passionate about the rights of women and children living in neglected neighborhoods and how architecture can help bridge the glaring gap between the rich and the poor. Bhavna. Bhavna?
Hello. Yeah. Am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me here. Thank you, Sandeep and Uday, for pushing me to write this. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to do this. But I'm very excited. I'm performing any kind of poetry for the first time. So, and sorry, this is in Hindi to the Swiss panelist. I would like to, maybe I'll try to do a translation and send it to you later. So this poem doesn't have a title. It's in Hindi, and without like taking much time, I would like to start. आज अपने माचिस की डिब्बी से थोड़े से बड़े किराए के मकान की खिड़की से बाहर देख, एक आम के पेड़ को देख, एक बेहुदा सा ख्याल आया। ये जो हजारों चिड़िया इस पेड़ की अनेक डालियों पर रहती हैं, वो किराएदार हैं या मकान मालिक? ये चिड़िया पेड़ को चुनती हैं या पेड़ चिड़ियाओं को? क्या इन्होंने भी पेड़ों को धर्म और जात में बांटा हुआ है? नीम के पेड़ पर बस मुसलमान चिड़िया रहेंगी और आम के पेड़ों पर सिर्फ हिंदू, और बाकी अल्पसंख्यकों को सिर्फ छोटी मोटी झाड़ियां ही नसीब होंगी। क्या वो चिड़िया जो थोड़ी सी हताश लग रही है, डाली का कर्ज नहीं चुका पा रही? और वो जो पीले पंख वाली चिड़िया उसे चिढ़ा रही है, क्या अपने पुरखों की डालियों में की हुई स्मार्ट इन्वेस्टमेंट का फायदा उठा रही है? मैं ऐसे ही बेहुदा ख्यालों की ट्रेन पे सवार हो चली जा रही थी जब आम के पेड़ से आवाज आई, सुनो, चिड़िया न मकान मालिक है न किराएदार, बस अपने घर की रहवासी है। तुम इंसानों ने ये ख्याली खिताब बना घर की पवित्रता को सिकोड़ उसे मकान जैसे निरस चार दीवारों में ढाल दिया है। और कितनी आसानी से भूल गए हो कि इस दुनिया में हर जीव और निर्जीव का घर होता है। मैं कौन होता हूँ चिड़िया से किराया मांगने वाला, जब जिस जमीन पर मैं खड़ा हूँ उसने मुझसे कुछ नहीं मांगा। घर तो लेन देन से परे है, पर ये बात तुम्हें कैसे समझ आएगी? तुम इंसान तो कहीं भी बेफिजूल की लकीरें खींचकर जमीन, पानी और हवा को बांट देते हो और फिर उन लकीरों को खुदा बना लेते हो। भूल जाते हो कि घर सपना नहीं, हक है सबका। अब घर का सपना देखोगे तो सपने वाले सपने कब देखोगे? मैं ध्यान से आम के पेड़ की बात सुन रही थी। इतने में मेरे मकान मालिक का फोन आ गया। किराया मांगने के लिए फोन कर रहा था। सोचा उसे पेड़ से हुई गुफ्तगू के बारे में कुछ बताऊं और किराया कम करवाऊं, पर मैंने मन बदल लिया। सोचा कहीं गुस्से में आकर मुझे वो पेड़ पर रहने के लिए ही ना बोल दे। अब बेचारे आम के पेड़ को क्या पता कि मेरा मकान मालिक उसका भी मालिक है और ताक में बैठा है कि उसे काट कर उस जगह पर नए कमरे बनवाए और किराए पे चढ़ाए। अब पेड़ को समझाऊंगी कल कि उसके रेडिकल ख्यालातों की जगह अब सिर्फ हाउसिंग के सेमिनारों में ही बची है। इंसान तो घर का सपना देखता ही रहेगा और खुद को मकान मालिकों और किराएदारों में बांटता ही रहेगा। शुक्रिया।
Thank you, Bhavna, for that thought-provoking poem. It definitely, yeah.
Bhavna, can you make a two-line translation just for our Swiss friends?
Yeah, sure. I will do that. Try to do that. Wait. I'll just give a brief translation of the entire poem. The poem imagines a conversation with me and a tree, and I'm dwelling on questions that all these animals that live on the tree, are they owners of the tree or are they renters? Are the tree also divided between religions and caste and creeds, thinking like, oh, you know, mango trees for Hindus and the neem trees for Muslims, and how that then the poem goes on to the conversation between my owner, my house owner, and how he wants to extract rent for me, and how I would want to use that information to tell him that this is not uh, he should listen to the tree. But then I end the poem on saying that whatever the tree was telling me, that the tree tells me that, you know, a home is a home. Anyone who lives in a home is the inhabitant, and an inhabitant cannot be divided into a renter or an owner. But I end the poem saying that these kind of thoughts are only for housing seminars, but humans will continue to divide each other between the renters and the owners. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bhavna. Yes, Uday, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Bhavna. I think Vedi sums it up very nicely. She says this was absolutely heartbreaking but beautiful at the same time, and you painted with your words. So thank you for sharing this. Now we'll move on to a brief overview of the housing cooperative model in Switzerland, which will be provided to us by Dr. Phillippe Koch. Dr. Phillippe Koch is a professor in urban politics at the School of Architecture, Design and Civil Engineering, Institute of Urban Landscape of the Zurich University of Applied Sciences. He has a PhD in political science from the University of Zurich and MAS in political science from the University of Bern. His expertise and research has focused on urban politics, spatial development and planning policy, metropolitan governance, local government reforms, and political participation. Dr. Phillippe Koch.
First of all, thank you for the invitation and thank you for this nice environment. It's kind of sad that I have now to go into more technical details and not be able to give a poem like that. So I just put my slides on. As you said, Uday, I'm a political scientist, so the focus of my presentation is really on the political aspects, like the regulatory frameworks, the policies and politics that are instructive and shape how cooperative housing evolved and also maintained its role. So, and it's a pretty brief overview, and you will hear more about, especially about the Zurich case from Anna Schindler and Hans Rupp. So I'll try to keep it brief. Okay. So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about, I present here some key facts and figures so that you can have an idea of the scope of housing cooperatives in Switzerland. All over Switzerland, there are just 5% of all apartments owned by housing cooperatives. So they don't own a big chunk of the apartments in Switzerland. But when you go into urban areas like Zurich, there is the main terrain, so to say, where housing cooperatives are really important and have a strong position. What is also important to note is that housing cooperatives in Switzerland are not social and public housing, state-owned public housing, but they're self-organized forms of non-profit affordable housing. Even though the state plays its part, and often the local state has a say in the development of housing cooperatives, they're de jure autonomous. When we look at rents, the rents in housing, cooperative housing apartments are on average 20 to 30% lower than market rent. So they really achieve the goal of providing affordable housing. They are membership-based organization, and most of them have a strong tradition of democratic participation. So all members and all the inhabitants of their settlements can participate in the main decisions of the housing cooperatives itself. And what I think is really crucial to understand is that housing cooperatives are not just an organizational form to produce affordable housing, but they have, and again in Switzerland, they become political actors, actually shaping the whole regulatory framework, by also shaping them and not being just the object of political decisions, but they try to also shape these decisions. So what I'm going to talk about now is just to give you an overview over the federal structure of Swiss housing policies and some conducive policies for cooperative housing. And the last point will be on the issue that politics actually matter a lot when we think of cooperative housing. Similar to India, Switzerland is a federal state, so there are different governmental levels. And when we look at the federal level, there are two housing policies is divided into two distinct policy domains codified in the federal constitution. One is the regulation of tenancy matches, which is mainly federal. And then there is the promotion of housing construction, which is a shared responsibility of all three levels of government. And the focus of this presentation is obviously on the promotion of housing construction, not so much on the regulation of tenancy matches. So when we think of these shared responsibilities, here is a map of Switzerland divided into all cantons. That's like the main political level, the cantons, which are highlighted here in different colors. And then within the cantons, you have all the municipalities, like the local level. All over Switzerland, we have more than 2,000 municipalities, 26 cantons, and the federal level. So the federal structure of Swiss housing policy is divided, or the housing policy itself is divided among those, the responsibility among those different levels. And And so I try to give you a brief overview of all the policies that we have, or the main policies that we have on these different levels. On the federal level, there is a Housing Support Act, first established in the early 70s and then reformed roughly 20 years ago. And on the federal level, there is codified this idea that the federal level can directly support non-profit housing organizations. But this possibility, or this aim, has been suspended since 2003. So the federal level does not support directly non-profit housing organizations anymore. It was due to financial issues at the time. And apart from that, there is indirect support of non-profit housing providers through bonds issue, guaranteeing of debts. And there is also funding of research and support of best practices. All in all, this kind of regulatory framework on the federal level is not really strong. So the position of the federal level when it comes to the promotion of non-profit housing or cooperative housing is pretty weak. And there is not much money spent on the federal level to expand the role of housing cooperatives. Nevertheless, there was this attempt by a popular initiative to strengthen the role of the federal level. And there was a popular vote early this year on the promotion of affordable housing on the federal level. So all citizens in Switzerland had the right to vote on that proposal if the federal level should take on a strong role in the promotion of housing cooperatives. And what we see here on this map is the results of this of that popular vote. And all green areas were in support of the popular vote, and all purple ones rejected the popular vote. All in all, it was rejected not really slim, but still it was not a bad result for the housing cooperatives. And when we talk about the federal structure of Swiss housing policy, this kind of result of the popular vote is really instructive, because you can tell by this vote there in which places affordable housing is really a key issue, and also where people, the residents, the citizens, have an interest in promoting more affordable housing. So the green areas are, it's not really a surprise, are in urban areas. So when we move on to the next map, we can see this map shows the urban areas in Switzerland highlighted in red. And when we compare it to the results of the popular vote, you can see that the green and the red areas are quite, they match quite nicely. So what we can see is that affordable housing is mainly an issue in Switzerland in urban areas. There you have a lot of people supporting affordable housing and housing cooperatives, and they even organize in political ways to establish a more conducive framework on the federal level. However, they got rejected by the more rural parts of Switzerland. So it is important to acknowledge and to understand that the most important policies are actually on the low level, not on the federal level, so on the cantonal level and on the local level, where these distinct preferences and interests can be articulated in a different way. So when we move on to the cantonal level, we can see that only 9 cantons out of 26 adopted housing policies at all. So a majority of cantons don't feel the need to come up with a regulatory framework for housing. And when we look at, I just picked up the 4 cantons, that's Basel, Geneva, Vaud, and Zurich, which are the most urbanized cantons. We can see that the cantons have developed different mechanisms, different instruments to support housing cooperatives. We have the direct support of non-profit housing developers, not just housing cooperatives, but all non-profit housing developers, established in 2 cantons. We have zoning laws, which might help to produce non-profit housing. In all cantons, you can get support for individual housing projects. So when a housing cooperative attempts to build a new settlement, they can get support from the cantons just for this kind of project. And then apart from that, we have also support of tenants and public housing in a small bunch of the cantons. So compared to the federal level, there is a kind of a diversity and also a range of policy instruments to actually support housing cooperatives, but only in only 9 cantons, so only in the minority of all cantons. And this also translates, of course, into the share or the magnitude of housing cooperatives across cantons. I picked again the same cantons where you can see that compared to the overall importance of housing cooperatives, you can see that in these cantons, especially in Basel and in Zurich, housing cooperatives play a bigger role than on Switzerland at large. So in Basel-Stadt, in the canton of Basel, you have like 10% of all apartments are owned by housing cooperatives. In Zurich, it's roughly 9 to 10%. And then Geneva and Vaud, which don't have the same kind of tradition of housing cooperatives as in the Swiss-speaking part of Switzerland, the figure is lower. So you have this diversity and uneven development of the regulatory framework across cantons, and this also shows in the figures that you have on who owns the apartment. And then when we move on to the local level, to the city, there we really find conducive policies for housing cooperatives, and also a much larger share of all apartments owned by housing cooperatives. And outstanding in this regard is certainly Zurich, with roughly 20% of all apartments owned by housing cooperatives. And then you have Basel and Winterthur, which is also a city in the canton of Zurich, with roughly 10%, and Luzern and Biel, which are smaller cities, but with a strong tradition of labor unions, which exceed also more than 10% of housing cooperatives. So when you really want to look for conducive policies, it seems obvious to look in cities for those policies. So the interaction between cities and housing cooperatives seems to be crucial to understand where housing cooperatives might be successful and where not. So I'm going to be really brief on Zurich, because I think Anna and Hans-Rupp will be, Anna Schindler and Hans-Rupp will be talking about Zurich extensively. So there are just like 4 main instruments: is lease of land, financial support, technical support, and also political and electoral support for housing cooperatives, which are key to understand the strong role of housing cooperatives even now in the city of Zurich. But I'll leave the rest on that to the other speakers after me. So the last point that I want to make is that politics matter. Often when I talk or when I discuss the issue of housing cooperatives, a lot of people have this idea that housing cooperatives are just a mere instrument, just like a technical body who can produce houses on a not-for-profit base, and which might be affordable, but they neglect the political role of housing cooperatives as a political organization, trying to bring together the community and try to also build up interests and be experimenting with different forms of living and instruments. So this political part seems to me really important, but a lot of time it has been neglected. And this figure that I picked here is, I think, interesting, because it shows over the last roughly 90 years who actually built the apartments in Switzerland. That's the whole Switzerland, not just the city. And you can see the dark line is are private persons, individuals who built apartments. The green ones are real estate companies. The red ones are housing cooperatives, and the lower, the blue one are public governments, local governments, or the public. And over the course of the last 90 years, the share of the newly built apartments by ownership changed. What is most obvious is that real estate companies increased their size dramatically, especially since the 90s. And this is due to a change in the regulatory framework. So up until the 90s, it was not allowed, for instance, for pension fund to invest directly in housing. And since the 90s, pension funds can invest in housing. So they took over a large bunch of the whole production of housing. And what is also interesting is that the housing cooperatives, they had really a heyday between the two wars, the two world wars, and shortly after the Second World War, so in the 1940s and 50s, they were really important in building apartments and also kind of manage and govern the urbanization of Switzerland, which happens mostly in the core center of the cities. And then after the 50s and 60s, due to suburbanization, like the spread of all people across Switzerland, the importance, the relevance of housing cooperatives diminished to a certain extent. And this is certainly due to the pattern of urbanization that we find at that time in Switzerland, but also that the housing policy is on a local level, made on the local level. So in suburban municipalities, there was no housing policy codified, and housing cooperatives themselves were not present outside the core city. So, and they were reluctant to go outside the city. There were a few big ones who tried to establish branches outside of the cities, but they failed, or they stopped doing that. So what we can see here is that urbanization and the regulatory framework hindered housing cooperatives to establish more apartments outside of the city centers, and also housing cooperatives were not able or willing to go beyond the urban core. And that's certainly something that we need to discuss in different parts of the globe, but also in Switzerland. Again, how is it possible, under which circumstances is it possible for housing cooperatives to establish homes, apartments outside of their main kind of geographical base, which is the city? So if we talk about the Swiss model as a success story, it is mainly a success story up until the 50s, and then a lot of housing cooperatives remained in the city. And we can see from the 2000 onwards, there is a slight increase in the apartments that housing cooperatives build. And I think it is an indication that since the 2000s, housing cooperatives became more political and also tried to establish a new kind of foundation, a new base, and also build new homes on a larger degree. So I'm coming to an end and try to sum up some of my thoughts on this overview. I think what is obvious is that for housing cooperatives to flourish, it needs a conducive policy framework, needs to be in place, and it depends on which level this framework is located. But that's also negotiable and depends a bit on the context. But what is more important is that housing cooperatives are not just policy instruments, but they're political actors too. And when we look at the history of Switzerland, you can say that housing cooperatives have a tendency to become more excluding and also more unpolitical. And my thesis, or my argument here, is that this undermines the strong role of housing cooperatives. So I think housing cooperatives really need strong ties to local communities and also urban political actors to maintain and even expand their weight especially in an increasingly commodified global housing market, which spreads all over the territory and is not focused just on the core city. So I hope that this short, brief overview helps maybe to frame the discussion a bit, and I'm interested for question. Yeah, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Phillippe, for the very interesting presentation. It definitely helps frame the discussions which will proceed in the webinar further. Next, before we start the next session, I'd like to welcome a few people who have joined a bit late. Welcome Dr. Sukumar, Ganapati and Gautam Bhan. Just as a note, this event is a recorded session. So, hi Gautam. This event is a recorded session, so the recording of this event will be available on the YouTube page of INHAF. Also, we have the Ahwan project again with us, but they will be performing at the end of the session. Next up with us, we have Anna Schindler, who's the director of the Office for Urban Development of the City of Zurich. She'll be talking with us about the role of local governments and how City of Zurich has enabled housing cooperatives by giving them access to land and finance. I'll introduce Anna a bit. Anna Schindler is director of the Office for the Urban Development of the City of Zurich. The office is part of the presidential department and consists of 5 agencies: migration and integration, city and neighborhood development, economic development, foreign affairs, and smart city. Anna specializes in urban development issues. She worked as culture and architecture editor for different German and English publications. She was also a lecturer at University of Zurich and the Zurich University of Applied Sciences, where she taught media science, cultural communication, and management. She'll give a short presentation, and perhaps Amita, we'll get some time for Amita and her to have a discussion on some issues. Thank you. Anna.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction and for the invitation. I try to share my presentation. Actually, here we go. Now, I don't know if you already see it.
Perhaps if you put it in slideshow mode.
Yes, there's something I need to do. Yes, okay.
Yeah,
fine.
yeah, fine.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the city of Zurich, not the canton. So as Phillippe Koch already introduced and said a lot of things to give the framework, I think it's very important. I give you some examples of the city of Zurich. Quick overview of what I'm going to talk about: population growth, housing policy again by the city of Zurich, a little bit of our history of non-profit or affordable housing, then a short overview of our instruments that also Phillippe has already introduced a little bit, but just a little bit. And a very important issue for us, I think for you too, is social solidarity. And just to give you the frame, today Zurich is very attractive and it's a fast growing city. Even it's very small compared to Indian cities. It's growing fast, still is. And this wasn't always the case, because you see it in this graph due to the economic crisis in the 1970s and the 1990s. There were important industries left the city, many inhabitants left the city, and we had only 360,000 people living in Zurich. Now we are facing the other challenge of a growing city, because Zurich has been growing since 2000 quite fast, more than 1.5% per year. And prognosis say that we will reach more than 500,000 in 2040. And this is for Switzerland and for Swiss cities, Zurich being the biggest city in Switzerland. This is quite a dynamic change. And it has some challenges, because it's a very important goal for Zurich. We want Zurich to be a place for everyone, not just for rich people. It's an attractive city. It has its price. I think it's one of the most expensive cities in the world. But we want it to be a place for everyone. So as a city of Zurich, we need to use all our possibilities in order to offer a wide range and different types of housing, because the most important thing to allow a lot of people to live in the city is to offer them a mixture of different housing types. And the goals of the city's housing policy are fixed in this municipal code. It's called Program Wohnen, Program Housing Program. It has been written in 2012. It has been rewritten in 2017. And the most important goals are, as you see here, attractive residential areas for all people. So this means for different incomes, social diversity in all neighborhoods, protection and increase of the percentage of the non-profit or of the affordable homes. And I will show you, we have much more than 20% in the city of Zurich. We have already 26%. The goal is to achieve 1/3, so 33% of all rentable homes. It's quite a difficult goal. It's written here until 2050. And then we have specific housing offers for families, for elderly people, and for people with low inhabitants with low incomes. This is more taken over by the city itself, but it's very important for us to have these different groups and allow all of them to live in the city. And then a very important thing at the end, because as if you remember the graph or the design Phillippe Koch has shown, where you see how important the real estate investors are, it is very important for us as a city to have a strong collaboration and a dialogue with all the relevant private players and the cooperatives in the housing market, because along with cooperatives and with what the city still owns, we are not able to reach this goal of 1/3 of affordable housing, affordable homes compared to all homes in Zurich. I'll show you this. This is an overview of the ownership of the housing market in Zurich. You see the total number of apartments in 2019 has been more or less 230,000. It's more than half, almost 74% of all these apartments are privately owned. Most of them are rented, and some of them are privately owned and occupied by the owner. This is a very small share because most of the apartments are rented, but it's like 3/4 of all rented flats in the city are privately, in some way privately owned or privately rented. And the rest, the other 26%, are owned by housing cooperatives, by associations, by private trusts, or by the city itself. And you see the share of what the city itself owns is the smallest one. It's about 14,000, 15,000 apartments. So this is not the big. This doesn't give the city very much mean to play or to build, because we don't have the possibility. We have all sold or all loaned or all rented out. So this is a very different situation in Zurich compared to maybe other cities like Munich or Vienna. But at the end, you see this number, non-profit housing, it's 26% in total. And I said we have this target. We have this target to arrive at 1/3 of all rented apartments that must be non-profit, should be non-profit until 2050. And what you see here is are the latest numbers, because every 4 years, this has been a political referendum. So every 4 years, we as the city must show the parliament how we are doing, if we are really trying to reach this goal. And as you see, you must look at the two blue pillars on the right side. Then you see these figures are almost the same. We have been, I would say, stuck at 26%. We have had 25.7% of affordable non-profit housing in 2015, and we have 25.9% in 2019. And in real numbers, there have been constructed a lot of non-profit units. I think more than ever if you look back in the last 20 or 30 years. But in the same time, also private owners have constructed a lot. There has been going on a lot of construction. So it makes very hard for us to keep the percentage. Actually, it is, maybe it will be impossible, but it's still with a very strong growing number in absolute numbers, very strong number of affordable housing. We still just achieved 26%. But luckily, to achieve this goal, we have a long established tradition in housing cooperatives. Phillippe Koch has shown how they have been important between the two world wars. In Zurich, we have a history of more than 100 years of housing cooperatives. And it was by the end of the 19th century when industrialization made people move from the countryside to the cities. Zurich had to deal with housing shortage, as had a lot of other cities. And in order to react to the situation and to the poor living conditions, as you see here on this photo, and the poor living conditions back then, one of the first cooperatives was founded in 1892. So this is like 120 years ago, and then has been following a private initiative. And then after a popular vote in 1907, the city of Zurich itself started its first own housing project with 225 apartments. And in the 20s, after World War I, the city was again suffering from housing shortage. And this was the moment where many cooperatives were founded because they had the example of the others already existing. And some of these cooperatives that have been founded 100 years ago are still existing. And already back then, this was one important thing for them to survive. The municipality, the city, supported them by offering grants. Today, we have different instruments to stimulate affordable housing, and I will show them on two levels. Like this one is on a higher ranking level because it talks about regulation and about planning instruments. One thing is adaptation of existing instruments and planning instruments, regulations. A very important new instrument is this communal structure plan, settlement, landscape, and public facilities that the city of Zurich has designed. It's now being talked and being revised in Parliament. And it shows, I'm going to show you this in the end, it shows where the city can grow. And it also it shows also where it can get denser, and it also defines how this must be done in a socially acceptable way. So this is on the planning, as a planning instrument, a very important instrument. Then we have the landowner binding the definition at the level of utilization plans, zoning and building ordinance. We participate as a city in this cantonal implementation ordinance. This famous Article 49b is a Planning and Construction Act that defines zones of non-profit housing. We have, since I think 1 or 2 months ago, since the last vote, last referendum, the city has gained enlarged competencies to buy property. So this means the city government can buy property without asking first the parliament to allow it. The only problem is that there's not much property left to buy. This is maybe the bigger problem. And then we have a means that has been a bit neglected in the 90s, and it has been very important in the 80s, has been neglected since. And this is a systematic promotion of subsidized apartments for lower income. So it's not only affordable or non-profit housing, but it's subsidized apartments for people who gain even less, and they are according to the regulation on cantonal level how they must be subsidized. And more concretely, also Phillippe Koch has said housing cooperatives, housing policy is local policy. It's true, the city has different instruments on local level and municipal level. For instance, when the city owns a plot, it usually doesn't sell it. The city has sold a lot of land, too much land, I would say, in the last 30, 40, 50 years. Today, it's not being sold anymore, but the city creates a building lease, like a life estate at the low price. And this goes on for the next 66 or 99 years, so that the cooperative or a similar institution, it's mostly housing cooperatives, can loan this land and can build on the site, and has has a security to be able to stay on for the next almost 100 years. So this is a very, and the rent is fixed. So if the rent you pay, you fix today, is will go on in the future. And the municipality also has the option to participate in projects with capital, like city grants. It gives, the city can give and gives loans, subordinate loans at low interest. So it's for the it's not for the first part of the loan that the cooperative has to get from the bank or from some other institution, but it's of the subordinate loans that usually come after, then the city can give them at very low interest. So this also helps the cooperative. And then in order to make affordable housing available for as many people as possible, there are also some regulations for obtaining this low price or these non-profit flats or apartments. And one of the most important ones is the limitation of the apartment size according to the number of people who live in it. So it's the number of people plus one is the number of rooms. So 3 people can live in 4 rooms and so on. And usually the cooperatives also have a kind of income, of regulation of the income. So there's a maximum income you can have to be able to participate in a cooperative. And the last thing, again, also with cooperatives, today when the city gives a loan or gives a lease in hereditary rights to the cooperative, we ask for a minimum of 20% of subsidized apartments. And yes, cooperatives today, they accept it. It's not always, it has not always been easy, because it's a different kind of people living in these subsidized apartments, maybe than in the rest of the cooperative. And the last thing, I will show you a map of Zurich to show you how important cooperatives are also, and planning is also for this for the social solidarity a city must have. In this map, this is a map from this structural plan on local level. You can see where the city of Zurich has the potential for densification over the limits of the zoning and building ordinance. So we have some rules how high and how dense you can build, and in this plan we show where the places are where you can go over all these bindings, because it's where the city needs to grow. I said before, the city doesn't own any land anymore. We have more than 70% of the flats and of the land is privately owned. So we need to grow, the city needs to grow inside everything that's already constructed. We cannot grow outside our boundaries. And what you see here is the redder, the darker the color is, the higher is the potential for densification. And of course, it's in all these regions, in the flat part of the city, where you have a very good access to traffic, very good access to energy supply, and also where, and this is what I show on the next slide, where the inhabitants with the low incomes live. Because what we do in the Department of Urban Development, we do a kind of social and spatial monitoring to show the city, to show our colleagues where the social solidarity maybe is most at risk. And this map shows the incomes, kind of a map of the income. To know, we need to know where the low-priced homes are under threat when the city gets denser and when we build a lot, and we need to know where we must be very attentive, where we must pay very much attention, and where we need to react. This map shows the average income structure of the households in a certain area. Dark blue is higher income, light blue is lower income, and if you put the two together, the areas, then you get the areas at risk. Then you see where the areas are with with certain building types, with households that might be replaced soon because they are more than 50 years old, and where the lowest incomes are. And as you see, if I go back, you see this dark green, the dark green spots. If I go back to this picture, you see that the dark green spots are more or less in the same places where you have the most potential for the city to grow. And this is something that has become very important for us, for the city, to see, okay, these are areas at risk maybe when the city really grows and when it gets denser and when there are a lot of old buildings that need to be replaced to make space for new ones, for more people, then we need to pay attention if this is a socially not so stable area, and we must look more closely at the social aspects of the project. We must ask owners, private owners, not to do all the construction on in one period. We need them to take care, need to ask them to take care of the people that who rent their apartments, and to be a bit to pay attention on what they do. So it's very important for a growing city that its good quality is not only connected to physical aspects but also to social ones. And once again, if you have an area where the city is growing and you see that there's there are some social issues, one of the best ways is to ask the owner, and we have some regulations to do that, to build also affordable housing, a certain share, a certain amount of affordable housing, so that people who lived in this area before can remain where they are. Thank you. This was my short overview on some issues the city of Zurich is dealing with.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you very much for this very informative presentations. Perhaps if you could stay till the end of the session, we'll have a discussion session moderated by Sandeep, where we can also have your key insights upon some issues, some questions, specifically in the Indian context. If I could request now Professor Amita Bhide to moderate a short conversation with Anna. Amita ji.
Anna, you probably don't know Amita. Amita is with the Tata Institute of Social Sciences. She gave a very nice presentation yesterday on the history of the cooperative housing structure in India, and where we stand today and what are the problems we face. And she's worked a lot with many governments on issues of housing. So we are asking her to ask you a few questions which will be relevant to us here in India.
So what I thought, Anna, is perhaps to only raise a few issues, and thanks for that wonderful presentation. I think the presentation gave us a lot of insight into how the city of Zurich is able to respond to issues of housing. And it overlaps, I think, some of the issues and concerns that you raised overlap and perhaps resonate also with some of the housing issues that we face here. Number one, that Zurich is a growing city and has a fairly high degree of growth. The second concern, I think, that you also spoke about is in terms of how the city land supplies are at the brink of exhaustion, and how perhaps there might also be a need for re-densification or expansion of the city itself. So some of these issues are really very interesting. One of the things that I was reflecting as a challenge, and this is perhaps in continuation also with Dr. Phillippe Koch's presentation and your presentation, is I didn't hear much about the challenges faced in the wake of interconnection of housing markets across countries, across cities, housing investment which is done for a speculative purpose, and how that has affected the entire investment and the overall ecology of the housing system itself. I would say that in India, the post 2000 period has been an extremely volatile period where one has seen a lot of investment happening through mutual funds, the more organized market, and as a result, land prices and housing prices have kind of zoomed upwards, and every city loses then the control. The market no longer remains local. And what I saw actually in both your presentation is Zurich city looks at its own inhabitants, their housing needs, and tries to respond to them. But I am not seeing this influence of the external forces which are impacting on the housing market. So some reflections on those challenges, if there are any, I think it would be very good to hear from you. The second question that I have is in terms of actually trying to understand what is the overall budget that the city of Zurich spends on housing in relation to perhaps other areas of priority. What is the order of priority that housing has, and what is the amount of budget that you also spend on the housing budget? And I think that perhaps is also linked to the overall role that housing plays in the shape of city evolution to appear. Are there expectations of housing economy also contributing to the city budget? And that is my third question. I would really like reflections on some of these.
Thank you. My problem is that I only understood half of what you were saying because you have very bad connection. I think the first thing is the budget of the city and how important housing is in the budget, right?
Yes.
I cannot give you the exact numbers, but if you would count also the loans for the cooperatives and everything, I think it comes up to maybe 1/5 of the whole budget. But actually it's not in construction because the city doesn't construct. We don't have the land anymore. We have done a lot of quite a few of city-owned local housing in the past 10 years. And now it's not about construction. So it's more about giving the land to the cooperatives. But it's a very, very important issue. And even if, things like mobility and energy supply and also are bigger parts in the budget, it is a very important issue. And also with all, housing is just one part, but then it has all the consequences, like when people come, like building schoolhouses, like building infrastructure, and this is all linked to housing, and it's a very important issue of Zurich's policy. This was the first question, and the second, maybe you need to repeat because I really, you really have bad connection, or I have bad connection.
So the second question had to do with the influence of a speculative economy and speculative investment in housing, especially coming through the integration of housing markets across the country.
Speculation, I think it's prices are very high. Prices of the land are very high. In the average, prices of apartments are very, very high, and there would be much tendency for speculation. But I think it's we have had the regulations. The city has succeeded in have the regulations to not allow speculations more than there are some projects, but not much, because one is this vote. One is this maybe this vote, or for instance, as an example, this vote to get from 25% of affordable housing, non-profit housing, to 1/3 in the next 30 years. So this means that it's very hard for speculators to build, because we have this need to get this share of affordable housing. So what the city does today, when some private investor wants to build, and maybe when he wants to build more than more than is allowed in the zone in the zoning ordinance, then he can do that. He gets more from the city, but he has to build maybe a share of maybe 50% of affordable housing to give something back. So I think this is there are very strong rules against speculation nowadays in the city. It has been possible some decades ago, but today it's very hard. But prices, we are still talking about very high level because everything is very high. Even if we talk about non-profit housing, and we have actually defined this non-profit housing is really when the owner builds a house and he must be a non-profit organization, and he can rent the flat or the apartment just at the price he has paid for its construction. So this is really non-profit, but it's still on a very high level. This is true.
And does the city maintain a demand register of those who require housing? Does the city maintain a demand register for those who require housing, or these are all self-organized? So cooperatives would prepare their own lists of people who would be part of cooperatives, and other non-profits perhaps also have their own lists.
Yeah, the city has the cooperatives or private cooperatives, self-organized, and the city has some trusts, like we have a trust for Stiftungen, some foundations for families, for family housing, foundation for elderly people, and so on. They also they are foundations or trusts. They build housing. And then, but the city itself only has like 7% of all the apartments are built by the city. I don't know if this is the answer to your question.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I wanted to point out basically that it seems that Zurich and overall the different cities in Switzerland have much more control on the overall housing ecosystem, and they take a very nuanced interest in the subject of housing. I think even the maps that you showed talk about the tools which have been developed by the city to understand the situation of housing and to respond to it better. And plus, there is the addition of both land instruments as well as the financial instruments and the regulatory instruments to perhaps back that up. And that has been perhaps very critical to see that housing cooperatives have grown to the extent that they have in Zurich. So really thanks, Anna. Yeah, perhaps Uday, you can take over.
Yeah. Thank you, Amita ji. Thank you, Anna. The next session we have with us is with Hans Rupp. This session will talk about cooperation amongst cooperatives and how existing cooperatives can support the establishment of new cooperatives. Perhaps it will also touch upon international cooperation between housing cooperatives. I'll introduce Hans Rupp and Leah Oswald, who's moderating this session with Hans Rupp. Hans Rupp is CEO of ABZ, Switzerland's biggest housing cooperative and a board member of Cooperative Housing International. The cooperative, Hans has adapted in complex and diverse environments on national and international level. Hans says the cooperative model offers sustainable solutions to the problems you're facing worldwide. That's why we need to further promote its benefits. He studied psychology, modern history, and holds an executive MBA in general and international management. Leah Oswald works as project manager for the NGO UrbaMonde based in Geneva. She facilitates the CoHabitat network, who are one of our partners of organizing this webinar, which brings together CoHabitat network brings together some of the major grassroots organizations from the field of community-led housing. She collaborates on international cooperation projects with Latin America housing cooperatives since 2016 and with the Asian Coalition of Housing Rights since 2019. Hans and Leah, take it ahead.
Thanks, and good evening to everybody. Greetings from Switzerland. Let me give a short overview of the situation here in Switzerland. We'll start with that first. We dig into Zurich. We heard a lot of things about Zurich already. Then we go back in history in order to learn what about the key factors were that motivated the actors back then to form corporations. From there, we distillate the key factors of the system in Zurich as it is right now. And we have then finally some ideas on how to enable cooperative housing on regional, national, or probably even international levels. So speakers already mentioned about the situation in Switzerland. We have a rental system prevalent in Switzerland, not an owning system. You see here the key figures. What you can say is that
sorry to interrupt, yes. But maybe because we cannot see very well your presentation, I think we see your whole screen. Maybe you can just enlarge the presentation, focus on the presentation.
Is it better now?
Yes, thank you. Sorry.
Great, thanks for reminding me. I was talking about the key figures, but I'll leave that. We see the cooperative housing market in Switzerland. You see the columns there, you see the blue ones are ordinary apartment rents, commercial apartment rents, and the green ones are the cooperative rents. And you see the left pairs are from Switzerland and the others are from the cantons where we have cooperative housing, and you see a significant lower rents in cooperative housings than in commercial housing. The situation in Switzerland is that we have a very low vacancy. It's below 1%. We have a lack of affordable housing, affordable flats, which leads in the end to a segregation, gentrification. The low income households are pushed outside the city, and you see the picture is from a municipal project Anna Schindler probably knows very well about, and you see the people lining up in order to get a flat, to see the flats there. This is a very poor situation here in Switzerland. So let's go back in history. By the end of the 19th century, industrialization led to a rural exodus. People moved away from the countryside to the cities. Housing supply was by no way able to meet the needs of the people, and in addition, the infrastructure in the cities was desolate. There were no sanitarian things available, and the people renting out not rooms, not flats, but beds in shifts. Like the beds were rented out in 3 shifts a day, so people could find a place to sleep. Local authorities were very concerned about this situation, and they were mainly afraid of epidemics, but they were also afraid of social unrest and uproars, as in Europe it was the high time of Bolshevism. So cooperatives and the town of Zurich decided to team up on some basic ground rules that over 100 years later are still fueling a valid and vivid system. And I tried to put together some of the key factors. And I'm very glad that the land lease was mentioned a couple of times. At 100 years ago, and I think that's really to be considered, the city sold the land to the cooperatives. That gave the cooperatives the means to build up substance, which is not possible if you lend out the land. So 100 years ago, cities sold the land. The co-ops built the houses and the buildings and the apartments, and they run the entire thing. And they were based it on some common ground rules. It's in orange. One is the cost rent, that the rent should not be higher than the overall cost for a long-term maintenance of the settlement would cost. There was a renounce from speculation. I think that's a key issue. We don't talk about the land and the market situation with land here. That's a bit off topic, but it's one of my favorite topics when I compare situation internationally. So the cooperatives, they renounce from speculation. So when they own the land, they not sell it any further. So they keep it in their portfolio. And we have, of course, the democratic principle. As we are cooperatives, it's not the capital, not the share capital that determines the fate of the organization, but it's the people living there on a one people or the one person, one vote basis. This teaming up of the city and of the cooperatives on these basic ground rules led to a benefit for all. We have the affordable rent for the people in need. We have less poverty in addition. We have a long-term stability of the system. It's over 100 years stable now. Compared to other systems we see in the world that collapse, mainly systems that favorite an ownership model in the cooperatives. And we have fostering the civil society. I think that's also one key part. It's not about the regulations and the rent. It's about also fostering and enabling civil society. It has an integrating effect. It keeps neighborhoods attractive. And in the end, it was also mentioned, in the end, it's a liberal system. It's not because the cooperatives are independent entities. It's a bit off topic, but still, it's. I think it's key. It's not about providing. It's not about providing affordable housing. It's about community building. I mentioned the one person, one vote thing. It's also about the neighborhoods. People know each other, people stay there, people have the right to stay there. And in the end, it's also about a dream of enabling people to live a decent and self-determined life. It's not just about the housing, it's also about this. When we now reflect on the background of the cooperative movement in Switzerland, there are some concrete factors that keep the system till up to nowadays successful. We have also mentioned by the speakers before me, the federal government, states and cities, which foster a promoting environment with the urban and spatial planning, as Anna Schindler pointed out, with in some parts defining income mix for areas. Others, one mean is if you when you densify areas, then you pay tax on the densification of the increase of the value, which leads to lesser speculation. We have enabling conditions from governments, states and cities, like the selling of the land, or in nowadays the building lease or the lease of the land. We have the financial support by low interest rate loans or state secured bonds, which is very popular on the national level of Switzerland. But the cooperatives team up together themselves, and we firstly dig into the local perspective. It's about counseling, consulting. We have a lot of startup cooperatives. They don't know the regulations. They don't know how to finance the project. And the cooperatives, as they team up together, they can advise on building projects and what to avoid and which is best practice in having a new project up and running. It's also the peer-to-peer counseling. The bigger help the smaller. That's one of my favorites. I think we can all learn from each other, but the bigger ones have some more means in order to invest. Like ABZ invested in an app where our members can communicate with each other and we can communicate with them. And we now offer this app for free for all other and smaller cooperatives. It's also important to team up with the local authorities. So we have a strong connection to the city of Zurich and all the different departments and people working there, because we have a shared vision of living and livable cities, and also for the future. We do it in different roles and with different means, but we share it. And so it's very important to work together with these local authorities. It's also about recruiting. HR is a big issue to find the right people, the professional people that suit, that understand your business and then can help broaden and professionalize the movement. And of course, it's networking. It's bringing people together because it's a people's business, and it's also sometimes good that you realize that you're not on your own. There are other people doing the same job, having sometimes the same difficulties. On a regional or more national perspective, it's, as Phillippe pointed out, the state secure bonds, which offer better interest rates. We have solidarity funds. The established ones help the startups. So every member of the existing cooperatives pays a monthly share in addition to the rent into the solidarity fund, which then again helps financing startups or other projects. We have the legal support. It's important in Switzerland. Everything is very highly regulated. We have a lot of laws, and sometimes you just need the legal support to get through that jungle. We have pooled insurances. That's also something very important, because insurance fees can be very high if you're new or if you're at risk. And if you pool this risks, the fees you have to pay get much lower. Not to neglect is advocacy, lobbying on legislation and tax law, but also promoting the idea. Not everybody understands the system as it is in Switzerland. Even if you have a lot of cooperatives here in Switzerland, not all the authorities understand it. So it's a lot about talking to people, letting them know how cooperatives work. That's a big part that on a regional, national level you can do to help the movement, and of course promote the legal form. It's also the education. We have some specialities within the cooperatives that differentiate us from commercial companies. And when people go into the management of cooperatives, we try to educate them and also how to get started. It's also, we start now, it's also that especially driven by digitalization, we're offering centralized services for administrative work like accounting, ICT, or the digital tools in like the apps. And last but not least, we try to moderate the access to land. Switzerland is a small country. Land is limited. The land is actually a limiting factor. And if once and again land is sold, there's a big rush and which drives the prices up. And we try to moderate this process, at least within the cooperative movement, in order to avoid price bidding among the cooperatives. And I know it's number 4, but still it's an important idea. You have to look beyond the borders of your own country. And I think there are some success factors on the international level. It's also about knowledge sharing and counseling. When we talk about which system is more stable, the ownership model or the rental model, it's very important to have this international perspective. It's also very inspiring to see that there's an international movement with people all over the world having the same problems, sharing the same vision and the same idea, and to show everybody that it's possible to have this cooperative housing, to have affordable housing, to offer people a decent life. 3 examples there. ABZ helped was a cooperation with the Federal Institute of Technology and the ABZ and others, a rural town in Ethiopia, started like 10 years ago. That was an example when we tried to shift knowledge. We have MOBA. MOBA is an initiative in Southeastern Europe, where there is a weak stand for cooperatives, and they try to promote the idea. ABZ was able to give them some means to start working there. And of course, we have the Cooperative Housing International, which is a sector of the International Cooperative Association, a sectoral organization. And our main goal is networking, teaming up with others. We have UrbaMonde, we have MOBA, we have the CoHabitat network, and we have others. So we try to bring people together, share ideas. And as I mentioned, the ICA, this is the International Cooperative Alliance. It's a big cooperative movement worldwide, which is very traditional, very old. It's more than 120 years old. And it's one of the biggest and oldest non-governmental organizations worldwide. It's organized in sectorals, and we have the housing cooperative. So in any case, you need advice, or you need a vision, or you need people you can talk to, get in contact with us, with the ICA, with the Cooperative Housing International. Thanks. This was my short overview. Lea.
Thank you, Hans. Maybe I just have a few questions to add. I think we see very well that the solidarity is a main fundament of the cooperative housing model. And solidarity is not only essential between residents to build a strong collective at the beginning of the project, but also between housing cooperatives to build a strong movement, and not only on the national level, but also international level. And I think you showed it mentioning this association of housing cooperatives. Maybe we can come back a little bit on this aspect, because I think it's quite important. In Switzerland, we have actually 2 federations on the Swiss level that represent the housing cooperatives also in front of the public authorities. And they have been created quite early in the 20th century. So maybe we can come back a little bit on the history and the importance of creating also a national movement in order to represent the housing cooperatives really as a political actor, and to be able to scale up the cooperative housing model on the national level.
Oh, thanks, Lea, for mentioning this. I mean, teaming up is key. First, because investing in housing is very expensive, so you have a very high financial risk, and you move into a highly regulated market with very potent actors as the commercial investors. So if you just do it by yourself, you're on the weak spot. So I think you either by risk exposure or by not being taken seriously. So I think teaming up, professionalizing, sharing resources, and try to progress and get bigger is a key aspect. And it starts at the local level, and it ends at the international level.
And yeah, so we have also federations that represent the housing cooperatives on the cantonal level, usually in the cantons where the housing cooperatives are most present. And they also have a very important role in allowing housing co-ops to negotiate or to speak with the cantonal authorities. Also, for example, to have access to land or financial support. I don't know if you want to say a few words on this aspect too.
I'm probably not going too much into detail, but the key thing is that you line up your organizations, the cooperative organizations, the apex organization, accordingly to the authority organization in order to get an impact.
Yeah, and well, what is also really important to me working for UrbaMonde and for the CoHabitat network is the international cooperation, right? And you mentioned it. we know that one of the main challenges today is also to have access to affordable finances. One aspect is the legal framework and the public support, of course, but usually it's not enough in most of the countries to have access also to finance that are affordable, that can take in account also the poorest population, the most vulnerable population, to have access to what is actually the main mean to being able to build their housing. So is there also maybe something on the international level through cooperation that can be made through working together and maybe formulating some tools or mechanisms that can support other countries, population in other countries, to have access to this important resource, which is the financial aspect of a project?
Yes, the thing is, we are not a bank, and we are on heavy legal limitations, so we cannot, as a cooperative, directly finance cooperatives abroad. What we can do is we have these funds established, the solidarity funds, and we can give grants from there. So this is one means of doing that. Also, Sweden does that. They have a we effect put in place exactly for the same reason. They have an organization, they give this organization money, and this organization then transfers money and does the counseling. It's very difficult for cooperatives, as they are not banks, to transfer money abroad or on an international level. So the main thing I'd focus on is on the solidarity projects, but probably you have something else in mind.
Yeah, I mean, on our side, we actually work on a solidarity-based mechanism, which is a solidarity fund. And we try to mobilize housing cooperatives in Switzerland to participate to this fund, which will be able to finance local funds that are managed by the population and the residents to participate to the financing of their project. Which is quite a challenge today, is to mobilize the housing cooperatives in Switzerland and bring back also this reflection on solidarity and cooperation that is actually the core identity of a housing cooperative, and that should also participate to a bigger movement on the international level, not only on the national level or the city level, but really how to today it's a reflection we have, and we are trying to implement this tool, and we are working on that, and yeah, it's quite a challenge to bring people back to this really fundamental aspect of the housing cooperative identity, and of course there are main other challenges to confront because this is a big topic, the access to finance. But I think it's interesting to promote this and to try to really bring together the people around this aspect. Yeah.
That's great. That's I think from abroad money from abroad can be incubator, but in the end, to scale it up, also the financing, like the construction material, like we heard in the previous talk, like construction material, also the financing has to come from the place where these cooperatives are moving in or starting, and I think that's key. And there is really educating the people and helping them to promote it on the local level. Otherwise, you cannot scale it up.
Yes. And what is also interesting, if we refer to the Swiss example, they created quite quickly a federation on the Swiss, on the Swiss level, on the national level, which also brought the solidarity between housing co-ops to implement tools, like you mentioned, that can actually support new housing co-ops to be built. And it's mainly financial tools, but it's also sharing experience and knowledge. and giving some support. I'm living in Geneva, and Geneva is also a canton where the housing cooperative movement is quite growing now. And it's interesting to see that the canton is maybe that's a different with the Zurich example. In Geneva, it's more the canton who is actually supporting the housing cooperative development more than the city. And they're really trying to bring together older housing cooperatives that have been implemented for more than a century with new groups of people who want to create a cooperative so they can actually help each other or maybe build their first project together, sharing a same building, and bring together the resources and the means. Yeah.
I think it's really important issue that mentioned. It's really teaming up with the authorities, local authorities, because most of the time we have shared goals. They have people in their area. They also see the shortage of decent, affordable housing. So team up with them, try to find common ground in order to establish this cooperative movement. But it's also every country has its own system, its own difficulties. In some countries, the cooperative movement is very strong. Others have a devastated cooperative movement, like in the former Soviet Union states. Some people, some countries have a not existing rental model system, that they have solely the ownership model. So you're starting at different points, but I think the toolbox we have as being a cooperative, housing cooperative movement, toolbox is there and it's stable. And I think we can adopt it to the local situations in every country.
Thank you, Hans.
Thank you.
Thank you, Leah, and thank you, Hans, for this wonderful session. Now I'll quickly hand over the next session, which would be a discussion between all our speakers and two other speakers who have joined us. I'll quickly introduce them. Gautam Bhan. Gautam Bhan is a senior lead academics and research at the Indian Institute of Human Settlements. His work focuses on affordable housing, urban equity, urban inequality, social protection, and southern urban theory. He's most recently the author of In the Public's Interest, Evictions, Citizenship, and Inequality in Contemporary Delhi. Dr. Sukumar Ganapati. Dr. Sukumar Ganapati is an associate professor in public affairs at Florida International University. Dr. Sukumar Ganapati's research focuses are on housing, community development, e-government, and information technology applications. He has written some very key, insightful papers on housing cooperatives and the institutional aspects which enable them. Sandeep bhai.
Thanks, Uday. Thanks so much. So actually, we had a small film for you, but given the lack of time, we are going to do away with the small film and get straight into discussions on how we can learn from Switzerland and Uruguay. I really want to thank all of you from Switzerland, Anna, Hans, Leah, Phillippe, for giving us this introduction to your cooperative movement. Can I start by asking Gautam to not just give us an overview of the Switzerland model, but if you can give your own reflections on what that means for India.
Sure. So thanks, folks. Thank you very much for having me, and to all the speakers for their presentations over the last hour. It's been really interesting to watch. What I'll do is, look, obviously our contexts are very, very different. But I think that's where a lot of learning is actually possible if we don't try and move models and practices directly across. But actually sort of say what kind of questions and new ways of thinking about our own experience with cooperatives, say the Swiss experience, can give us. So I want to suggest three things, and I'll be brief. The first, I think, is to think a little bit about what Amita also mentioned about the political economy of the housing market into which a cooperative system is entering, right? And Amita noted, and the speaker, I'm envious of a kind of ability to contain speculation that has, that keeps a kind of control. I mean, we are literally on the other end of the spectrum in our housing markets, where the skew in our housing prices is so severe that the unaffordability actually affects the top 85% of our households, not the bottom 40% of our households, right? So, but I was very so I think the first thing I think that we should pay a lot more attention to is to see the combination of spatial, economic and municipal regulations that have enabled certain constraints on land markets. And I think that it's, we talk a lot in India about one or the other kinds of regulation, either regulations that try and control prices or regulations that try and reserve areas. But I think the interesting thing that struck me from the Swiss model was a combination of both trying to create a housing market and locate it with particular distributions in the city. And I think there have been attempts in many Indian cities to do this. But again, like Amita was pointing out, the nature of our housing market means that we as state actors have a lot less control about directing either investment through this, which is why I was very struck by the mention in the first presentation about zoning as a powerful strategy to direct, because that remains something that still, I think, Delhi, for example, the city where I'm from, is in the process of making the master plan for the next 20 years, right? And there have been discussions in the new Delhi master plan about different forms of what they're calling small form rental housing, which is non-individual based housing. Now, it's interesting to me that, in another time in India, that discussion would have been centrally about cooperatives. It would have actually been almost the starting point of that model, and that is no longer the case. And the Swiss experience is really making me think about how the idea of the cooperative as an organizing housing model has sort of been displaced from our imaginations of housing policy. And I want to offer two possible examples. One is that when you have a land market where unaffordability is even true of the top quartile of your income earners, cooperatives become a strategy to enter the land market and not the housing market, which means that actually it's elite actors who are organizing in cooperatives in India's large cities because it makes entry into metropolitan land markets viable. These are not rental-based cooperatives. These are not low-income affordable cooperatives that are actually way up in the upper end of our rental market in many ways, because they're the only way to enter a land market. And I think that gives me pause in some way to say that the history of cooperatives that came from the housing upgradation and affordable housing tradition is actually not the place where dominant cooperative action is taking place now. So we need to reframe that debate in the Indian context. The second, I was struck by the notion of the Swiss understanding of housing cooperatives as a deeply democratic practice that is also about community building and community making. And I was thinking about how actually in a lot of the housing rights movements I'm part of, we are seeing increasingly a demand from communities actually not for collective forms of tenure, but for individual forms of tenure entitlement. This is deeply debated within housing rights communities. But the truth is, all of us, when we're in community meetings, I have sensed personally, for example, the shift among communities saying they want individual title. So I think that it's interesting to me that we have to be, that if we're asking ourselves, what is the democratic impulse or the political or social community demanding cooperative housing? In metropolitan Indian cities, they are elite actors. They are not actually subaltern actors demanding that. And I think that's something we have to really take seriously when we think about, can we introduce cooperatives at the affordable end of our housing markets? The third, I think the lesson that's really interesting to me, again, is how municipal a project this is. And how this is about a deeply urban governance scale project, especially with even say in the Zurich example, when the city is the smaller owner of the households, but still through leasehold level rights on city owned land, through the city directly owning rental housing units, there is, I think, a kind of immediacy about the municipalization of this kind of cooperative housing. Now, in India, we have a challenge because our local governments are not nearly as empowered as they are in the Swiss context, right? Our large cities are effectively run by our states, which would, in the Swiss case, be a more province level or region level. This creates actually, it's not true everywhere. There's distinctions in Western India that are more municipal than Northern India, etc. But there's certainly a challenge for us in localizing housing strategies without strong municipal and local level governance. And this is something that plagues Indian urban governance in many places. And the last two ideas I want to pick up and offer actually is the one thing that I haven't considered, but I heard and now it's piqued my curiosity, is the example that Hans was just using about different cooperative projects or units in a network with each other as a collective voice. Now, this I think is a very interesting experience and a very interesting idea. I think that if we were to think about taking on the challenge of how to push and enable the idea of cooperative housing at the bottom end of our housing pyramid, we would need some imagination of how these are not isolated housing projects, but actually a connected set of a housing system at a city level. And I think we haven't thought about this much. I think it's a very intriguing proposition to me. And I think there's a lot to learn from the models of what this collectiveness kind of looks like. And the second thing I was going to suggest is that I think, you know, one of the challenges that I feel, which is, it's by the by, but I just want to mark it, is that one of the big gaps in the Indian housing market is that we don't have a formal anti-discrimination law in private housing, which means that there is a history of cooperative housing in India where it has used to enforce exclusionary social homogeneity. And unfortunately, we have Supreme Court precedents and our legal precedences has actually allowed, for example, a particular religious community, a particular regional community to have cooperative housing where only members of that identity group can be members. Now, this is to me the dark side of the cooperative, because these are political communities built on who they do not allow. These are complex debates. I'm not saying that they're simple, but I always, whenever the notion of the cooperative comes in the Indian context, I feel it's important for us to remember we also have a history of the cooperative as an exclusionary community practice and not a democratic community practice. And we don't have the legal precedents to prevent that as of now. And so my last point then is to say, I think that many of the kind of strategies that were being laid out, this ecosystem of support, actually made me think, I was asking myself, where have we done this well in the Indian context to create an ecosystem of support that both does the regulatory, the financial, the institutional, and the spatial together? And it struck me actually that the ecosystem that supports economic cooperatives in India is much more robust than that supports housing cooperatives in India. Right? I think it's important to remember that India has historically had some of the largest worker cooperatives in the world. And continues to have the largest worker cooperatives in the world. And those worker cooperatives required innovations precisely in regulatory frameworks, institutional design, practices, community building, relationship building, the structure of new forms of running, and needed new supply chains, needed all of those things. I actually think that we have not in India learned enough from the success of our economic cooperatives and what they could teach us for our housing cooperatives, right? Obviously, all the lessons won't transfer, but looking at the kind of ecosystem approach the Swiss policy system had taken, it struck me that we should both learn from different parts of it, particularly spatial integration, its emphasis on municipalization, its ability to both allow private initiative, but offer state support in that interesting balance, but also use this opportunity to remind ourselves to look at some unlikely sources of learning in our own context, which may not be immediately relevant, but I think the economic cooperatives actually have a lot to teach us. And I think they look very similar to me from the Swiss model about what a holistic policy approach looks like. So maybe we also try new tricks, because I think we're not at a historical or political moment in Indian urbanism where cooperatives for affordability are going to be an easy or inevitable or welcome transition. We will have to argue for this to become more of it. And I think it's worth an argument. So thank you all very much for the provocations and the chance to think with you. And I'll see you.
Thanks, Gautam. Hans, if I can take off from a couple of ideas that Gautam is talking about, just to get your quick reactions on this. How this cooperative, this coalition of support that you have created, and now there is a culture of cooperatives, I would say, at least in Zurich. So one is the imagination of being in a cooperative as against owning privately. How do people respond to that? Is it that people would prefer still to have private ownership, but choose cooperatives as a second-rate option? Or no, they really want to be in cooperatives? And how do your ecosystem of support promote this idea of cooperatives?
Thanks, Sandeep. On the first one, I think it's a difficult one because indeed some people choose to live in a cooperative, choose to join this movement, and others dislike it, and they don't want to move into a cooperative. So it's mainly because this cooperative movement in Zurich has also been in the line of fire of the political parties. And some see the cooperatives in Zurich as leftish. And Switzerland is still a very traditional conservative country, let's say. So we try to get away from this political labeling as a means that people are more open to choose also to live in the cooperative. There's another side to that. Because we are so attractive with price, a lot of people mainly want to live in a housing cooperative in Zurich because they get an affordable rent, or let's say even a cheap rent compared to the commercial market. So they don't know, or they don't value the ideas behind the cooperative. And we will in the next couple of years invest more in educating people living in our cooperative about the idea, so they get a broader understanding and they can promote it within their own networks. So this I think it's a very interesting question. Yeah, mainly.
But when you see successful cooperatives, does that encourage others to say that this is a good way to live?
I'm so happy that the variety of cooperatives is huge in Zurich. You have cooperatives, you can move in and you don't see a difference between a commercial company and these cooperatives. And there are other cooperatives on the other end where you are obliged to invest a part of your time in the cooperative itself. So we have a wide variety of flavors. We have cooperatives that offer a very traditional housing mix, family apartments mainly, very traditional. But we have others that explore the possibilities of other forms of living together, like cluster Wohnung, we call it, where you have a small private entity grouped together to bigger entities. So in order to be attractive and in order to be really part of the market, you have to be diverse. So it's not I don't give you an answer like say yes or no. It's diverse, and I think that's the key, one of the key successes. But of course, I'm proud if someone says I'm living in ABZ and I'm telling my friends that this is a good thing. Of course, I'm proud of.
Yeah. So I want to dwell on this a little bit from the Indian context, because I think what Gautam is touching on is crucial. Do we have wanting to own private property and to be able to therefore be able to give it as inheritance? So Sukumarji, you and Amitaji, I would like both of you to dwell on this, that where did we go wrong, or why did cooperatives go down in India? And do you think they have a chance in today's environment again? So Sukumarji first, if you can go on this, and just speculate a little bit on this, and then I'll ask Amita to come in.
Thank you, Sandeep. It's a very good question, and it's very good to be here. It's a very interesting forum. Sorry I missed the first day, but I've been listening to all of what has been happening today.
I know you had a bit of a cyclone or something in your area, isn't it?
We have had a hurricane here, the Eta, which put quite a lot of rain in the neighborhood. So the neighborhood was flooded.
Okay, but I'm glad you came.
We have our internet back just last night. But coming back to the point, what all of the speakers have been saying, and shout out to everybody. It's good to see you all, Hans, Jennifer, and Leah. I see some of my classmates are also on the call. The point I want to make on a larger scale in answering your question, Sandeep, is the ecological question. That is, what does it take for cooperatives to grow and sustain? If we look at it historically, we have, India has had a pretty vibrant housing cooperative movement in a few places, especially in Madras and in Bombay. And when I'm saying Madras and Bombay, these are the provinces prior to independence. And they were especially concentrated in cities like Bombay, or what is Mumbai now, and in what is Chennai now. But in both of these places, if we see the nature of the cooperatives, they are also different. So this brings back to a larger ecological question of what Phillippe started with on the institutional level of how laws, policies govern the operations of cooperatives at the ground level, and also the importance of the local housing markets, especially what happened in Mumbai and Chennai, and how the cooperatives developed. To answer your question on the sustainability, there are a couple of things. One is the nature of the cooperatives themselves. For cooperatives to sustain, there has to be something to hold them together. And for that, if we look at Mumbai, you do have these tenure cooperatives. What I call tenure cooperatives are the cooperative housing societies. They have something to hold together. They have something for operational activities on a daily basis. And if we look at the Swiss case as well, like what Hans does with ABZ and all of the others, there is a constant activity. There is a lot more a set of activities that go on a daily basis. Now that was not the case in Chennai. So Chennai, it happens on a case by case basis where people get together for various kinds of reasons, and then they die out. So on one level, the housing market matters and how cooperatives work or not. More particularly germane to the question of what is the topic of the whole seminar, that is, are cooperatives suitable for slums? Coming back to the point that Gautam was making, that cooperatives could be exclusionary. They could be exclusionary, yes, but they could be inclusionary as well. And we can look at the case of Mumbai itself, where historically there have been, the cooperative has been used as an organizational mechanism for getting people together, either for funding, putting their savings mechanisms together, or for getting collective operations together, whether it is for protests or for other kinds of activities, including sweat equity. And that's important. I'm not saying that one excludes the other. We do need to have overall institutional development if we have to have a sustainable kind of a cooperative movement. which means that cooperatives have to be very active at the high level, what Gautam was calling as elite. That would be important, because what you see from those kinds of top level elite cooperatives is that they sustain the institutional part of the cooperative movement. They come up, they are able to go forward in formulating the laws, the policies, and having the organizational mechanisms set in forth so that the cooperative movement as such is generally broadly known. And then the costs of entry of the cooperatives at the lower income levels in slums and other places, that becomes lower. So you do need this bigger institutional mechanism, which Hans has very well laid out in the case of Switzerland. And we need that in the case of India as well. I know the NCHF, the National Cooperative Housing Federation, as well as other institutions such as HUDCO have been supporting to a certain extent, but it's not to such an extent that you see this ecology grow much broader. So we do need this kind of a higher level support, but at the same time, we do need to have the the housing market and other parts of the economy work towards having a sustainable cooperative movement, especially if you're looking at housing.
Yeah, thanks so much, Sukumar. Amita, can you deliberate a little bit on this? Do you think
more.
basically that, do you think cooperatives has a chance in India again today?
I definitely do think cooperatives have a chance. In fact, I think cooperatives are perhaps the only form in some ways which has always come to the rescue when there are any inclusionary housing efforts. And there are some very, very successful, very notable attempts in order to do that, for which one needs to actually do several in-depth case studies as well. And we lack some of those. Like the most famous one, I think, is the Bhide Workers Cooperative, which was initiated in the city of Solapur. And it's an excellent case study in terms of how unorganized workers were mobilized and then through an organizational form, their savings in addition to the government coming in both as financial support and most importantly through a grant of land could actually create more than 3,000 houses of Bhide workers in Solapur. People who have always stayed otherwise in insecure. So the possibilities are there, okay? Especially when we think about the inclusionary end, and that is where I'm going to focus just in the next 1 minute. But I think that if there is a larger inequity, I mean, I don't think one can keep onus on just one organizational form called cooperatives to solve all the problems in the housing ecosystem. That is not something which an organizational or an institutional form can do. After all, it is also, I mean, cooperatives, as the ICA or the Indian philosophy itself called it, they are like the means, the golden mean between capitalism and socialism. So they have to work with the market, and therefore they have to have a supportive ecosystem. If that supportive ecosystem is not there, there is no way in which cooperatives themselves can be relied upon to create that inclusionary ethos.
Thanks, Amita. Jennifer, if I can come to you, I remember you were talking about the overall influence that cooperative housing has on the nature of rents in the entire city. If you can talk to you, especially from the Swiss experience, if you can tell us a little bit about that.
Yes, I mean, I cannot tell very much, but there have been studies here that have shown that, of course, the fact that there is an important housing stock that belongs to cooperatives, where the rents are we have heard 20 to 30% lower than in the private market, has a depressing effect on the overall private rental market as well. So there are statistical evidences on that. So that is, of course, an indirect benefit that we have from housing cooperatives, which again touches a bit upon the topic, whether it's exclusive or inclusive, whether it benefits only the members or also the community at large. And I think in that sense, I mean, from a pure economic point of view, we can say that cooperatives, where there is a sort of critical mass of cooperatives, there is an economic benefit for the community at large. And of course, there are other community benefits at large when we see, for instance, in the case of Zurich, that housing cooperatives make a very important contribution to the quality of neighborhoods, because they don't just provide housing, but they also provide public spaces. They provide really they contribute a lot to create vibrant and social inclusive neighborhoods. So I think this discussion on whether cooperatives serve only their members or whether they serve the community at large, as on the one hand can be discussed in terms of economic benefits, but also in terms of broader social benefits. And there are here evidences that it really benefits both from a social and an economic point of view.
So if I can now shift the whole discussion to the whole issue of land, because in India, there's generally an understanding or a feeling that there isn't enough land available for housing our poor, and the government doesn't have it. I don't know about the big cities, but all the smaller cities in India, which actually are holding many more people than our 4 or 5 mega cities, our experience has been that when we did an analysis of how many people are sitting on public land, on government land, almost 60 to 80% are actually on government lands. The governments haven't just been able to protect their lands or use their lands effectively. And the second is that, for example, in the city of Bhuj, where I come from, we did an analysis, and if everybody was given 65 square meters of land, we were still going to be able to free up 70 hectares of land for other public use. So again, Gautam, if I can bring you in on the politics of land in India, and what we find regularly is that even though, for example, the RAY program that was there by the earlier governments, they were allocating huge amounts of money for cities to only allocate land and get free housing and services. And yet cities did not come forward and free up their land for their own poor. So do you think that in India, you will need a top-down approach to make sure that cities actually give their land to the poor? Or do you think cities have the ability or the maturity to be able to do that? Gautam, can you first start on that?
Again, I'm going to have to be on audio. I hope you can hear me. Because I might have a little bit of technical connection issues. You know, I actually think, Sandeep, that the top is the problem. So the top-down approach is not going to free the land. So, you know, we have, like, let's look at, so I do agree with you that we should absolutely separate metropolitan land markets from non-metropolitan land markets, 100% agreement. And I think it's interesting that the two places that you have seen interventions that leverage publicly held land for affordable housing by actually giving land rights on occupied public land. There is the Odisha law of last year, and there is the Punjab Land Rights Act of 3 months ago. So 2 states that have made significant moves in non-metropolitan context to say, you know what, let's leverage public land. Now, again, both these acts have actually taken the form of individual rights to housing. Right? They've not gone the cooperative model. But even then, I think that there is a lot of potential to, I think there is an interesting state-level conversation to be had about the fact that without intervening and leveraging public land, we cannot, I think, make a dent into the kinds of housing equity we need, right? And that goes back to my point that even Amita was saying earlier, the skews in our housing markets are too severe, right? Because remember, they, you know, at one point, one of the speakers said there was a 1% vacancy. The vacancy in Indian metropolitan markets is much higher, but it's all at the upper end of our market. So we have a very speculated real estate market at this point. So I would say the tension here is actually that what municipal and urban governments are being told is to monetize their public land and value capture for particular forms of urban development. They are not being told to leverage their publicly held land for affordable housing. So we have seen this shift for 2 decades now, where state governments are being told land value capture, leverage land as a resource. Even the housing policy, not RAY, but the current housing mission, the words it uses are use your land as a resource in order to do public-private partnerships for slum redevelopment. So now you're absolutely right that, even in the metropolitan cities, in Delhi, 80% of informal settlements are on public land, right? So it is not in Karnataka, 65% of informal settlements in the state are on ULB land, urban local body land, not even state government land. So I do believe an intervention is possible. And I think that in those interventions, I agree with Amita that the cooperative model is exactly what should be coupled with those interventions as the most effective use of public land. But I don't believe any top-down intervention or any political thought is going to do this. I believe we have to actually really take on seriously multiple strategies of changing the discourse from land as the source of value capture and refinancing, and stepping away from this financialization to say, how do we create a movement of leveraging public land for affordable housing? And it's a tough fight, but I in fact agree with you that it is better started outside the top 8 cities, where the stakes and the political and I hope that we are able to see more of this.
Okay, actually, I'd love to go on with this conversation, but we are already 2 hours into this, more than 2 hours into this webinar. And so I will have to, I had a lot of questions on the issue of finance and how cooperatives organize themselves, but I guess we will have to leave it there for today. I want to thank all of you for coming together on this, and I hope we will be able to create a group here in India to re-examine and see how we can take cooperatives back onto our drawing board for the future. Can I hand over now to Uday for our final song for the day?
As you said, there are still many discussions to be had, but because of time, we have to move on to the last bit of our webinar, which is a performance by the Ahvan project. Ahvan project performed for us to start the webinar on the 9th as well. Ahvan project is deeply inspired by Kabir. They go from towns to cities to villages to spread the philosophy of love, harmony. I'll just hand it over to you, Vedi.
Thank you so much. I hope you can hear me. So first of all, I really need to thank Sandeep ji and Uday for allowing me to be here, because as I was saying the last time also, I was asking myself, what are you doing here? Or matlab, I don't know the correct translation to it, but मैं अपने आप से ये पूछ रही थी कि तुम्हारी जुर्रत कैसे हुई यहाँ पे इतने दिग्गज लोग जो असल में काम कर रहे हैं उनके बीच में तुम बोल रही हो. But today I realized that maybe I'm here to learn this beautiful part of understanding human behavior in society. And all this while I feel like chasing philosophies, the very practical sense of how to work on our society by ourselves is something that I really got to learn. I can't say that I understood everything. A lot of the things just went straight from over my head. But thank you for giving me the space. I really learned a lot, and I hope that I can continue learning. And yeah, coming to the idea today that I would like to share. as a race, we human beings often look at higher powers, be it structural powers such as government or leaders, or be it a more philosophical power. We always look at these powers when change seems bleak. But historically, the strongest force that's ever led a change is us, a collective. And that's the thought this song talks about, that today we need to come together, extend our hands, and claim our part in the cities we create. Let the world make excuses as it always does. Let everything else come and go as it is supposed to. But let's come together and claim our part. Let's reclaim the little pieces of our heart that built these cities and towns and spaces, bettered the lives and put smiles on other faces. And we stayed on the margins, away from the fruits of our own sweat and blood. But it's time to stop waiting to get our own share and move out of the rut. Let's come together and claim our part. Let's reclaim the little piece of our heart. आओ साथी, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, अरे मिलके हाथ बढ़ाओ साथी, आओ बनाए ठौर ठिकाना, आओ हाथ बढ़ाओ साथी, बाकी सब है आना जाना, जग दे चाहे लाख बहाना, अब ये बीड़ा खुद ही उठाना, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, ईटा माटी ढो ढो करके शहर गांव सब रूप लिया है, ईटा माटी ढो ढो करके शहर गांव सब रूप लिया है, ढोने वाला हाथ जो सूजा सात हाथ का छोड़ दिया है, जग का ना कोई माँ ठिकाना, अब ये बीड़ा खुद ही उठाना, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, जग को पहले रखने वाले, देख ये जग तो अंधा पड़ा है, मैं में डूबा जग भैया, स्वार्थ का रंग हर ओर चढ़ा है, किसकी रोटी किसे है खाना, अब ये बीड़ा खुद ही उठाना, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, बुन बुन कपड़ा दूजे का, जाड़े को उससे दूर किया है, अपने लिए अब बुन ले साथी, खुद को भी दे जो सबको दिया है, खुद को भी दे जो सबको दिया है, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, आओ साथी, आओ साथी. Thank you so much for giving me this space, and more importantly, teaching me so much. I hope to keep learning from you now that I've found all of you. I'm not going to leave your side. मैं परेशान करती रहूंगी. लेकिन I do hope that from this I can also learn and take this conversation forward in my own little way, no matter how small, with your guidance. And thank you so much for this.
Thank you all.
Sandeep, if you want to thank the panelists and everyone else.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First and foremost, I want to thank INHAF, Kirti, for pestering us and making sure that we did this. We have thoroughly enjoyed putting this together for India. I really want to thank Jennifer, without whom we would not have been able to do this. She has actually last year when she was here, she gave a scintillating talk, and which inspired all of us here to try and do something about reviving the cooperative movement in India again. So we are not going to leave it here. Just to let you know, Jennifer, we have already started discussing, and we have created a group of academicians and civil society organizations and a few people in the government of relooking at how we should take this forward in India. We will get back to you soon. Thanks so much, Leah. Our initial conversations with you and with ACHR really helped us in being able to design this 2 days for ourselves over here today. I really want to thank Amita and Gautam. They, we'll scan the environment, and these were the two scintillating people that we knew who still are associating themselves completely in the pro-people housing movement in India in academic institutions, and their inputs were very important in being able to help us do this today. Sukumar ji, we read a lot of your papers and then we got in touch with you. Uday has, I think, read every paper that you have ever written. And he was very inspired and was very clear that we have to involve you. And then we came to know through Jennifer that you both know each other. So it was very nice, and I hope we will be able to do something more with you in the future. I also want to thank the entire team of Hunnarshala, especially Aditya, Uday, Gaurav, who have been and Rupesh, who have been working on this and have been very inspired to try and do something about cooperatives in India again. That's all from my side. I hope I'm not missing out anybody. Once again, thank you to the Swiss team, Anna, Hans, Leah, Phillippe, for being with us throughout this entire over 2 hours of discussions here for India. Thank you so much.
We'll thank Bhavna and Vedi as well.
Yes, of course. They were our star performers. I think a lot of people who are still here who are listening to us is because they were wanting to listen to Vedi before they close.
Radhika, would Kirti
Yes, and Kirti sir, please.
Well, I think this was very late, and I think we run for 2 hours and 22 minutes, and still I think very quick things that I must do to end this. One is, of course, to thank Hunnarshala, Sandeep, and Uday for organizing this and moderating this very beautifully. I also thank this remarkably talented and I think a panel and very informative presentation. And therefore, thanks Anna, Hans, Leah, Gautam, Amita ji, Sukumar Saab, Jennifer. Thank you very much. Of course, thank Vedi and Bhavna ji. I think this was the only time this is the 31st webinar where we had such incredible poetry and music. It was wonderful. Thank you very much. I obviously have a lot to say. I think heard very carefully what have been said, and there's no much time, but I think very, very quickly make few points. Realizing that it's late, everyone is tired. It has been webinar has a sort of time span limit in terms of how long you can take. Just take few more minutes from me. And that's first, and I think most important, I think Gautam mentioned this, that our context is very different. And I think the most important statement that I saw in this meeting was a statement on size of the house, which says in Switzerland, people plus one. That's the number of rooms. We were exactly opposite. We have people divided by 2 or 3. And if you go to slums, it's people divided by 6 or 7 or 8. And that is a very important context that we must remember. Second thing that I want to kind of tell you very, very quickly is this, that fact remains that in India, we had a very vibrant cooperative housing societies, especially in Maharashtra and Gujarat. And I'm a beneficiary of that process because I lived myself in a housing produced by this cooperative movement. Systems were in place, land was being made available, the housing finance system were in place, and really middle class and lower middle class people have benefited. I know a school teacher who has built a beautiful house in Ahmedabad under this. So one of the things that we've got to do is to really go back, and this is what I think Sandeep is talking about, is go back and study what went wrong in the cooperative movement in Gujarat and Maharashtra. And of course, it was elsewhere, as Ganapati ji mentioned, in Mumbai and of course Tamil Nadu. So it's a very important part of looking at and reviving the whole cooperative movement. The second important point that I would like to make is this, that because this particular webinar also talks about cooperative movement in the context of cities without slums. And when you talk about cities without slum, it's evident, very, very clear. And I think we go on saying this, that slum problem is solvable if you really take right approaches and strategy. And therefore, citywide upgrading of slums is an answer to the slum problem. Now, one of the biggest advantages it has is this, that land is not an issue in the sense that land exists. People live in those houses, on the land on which they build houses. And therefore, if cities without slums become strategies, it's very possible to kind of go far in terms of solving the problem. And my real idea, and when I was listening to do, I think today and day before, was this, that if you really could introduce the whole concept of cooperative in the way of doing cities without slums, you essentially have a huge value addition. I'm not going into detail of that, but I think it's something that is possible and is doable. The next point that I wanted to make is this, that this country at this point of time is building large number of houses. Under Pradhan Mantri Gramin Awas Yojana, we're building something like 2 million houses, 20 million houses. And under Pradhan Mantri Gramin Awas Yojana, which is a rural program, we're building 30 million houses, which really means land exists, resource funds exist, a client exists, someone to deliver exists. Now, this program has problem of ownership, problems of quality, problems of maintenance, problems of looking after them subsequently. Is it possible to introduce cooperative concept, not only to build houses, but to manage houses which have been built? And I think it has a tremendous potential, because this house is, I say, required to be looked into, required to be managed, services are to be kept up, transport is to be managed and improved, all kind of problems to be looked after. So, okay, housing has taken place, land is there in place, finance has been in place, it's been built. Can you really bring in cooperative in order to kind of manage the housing stock and improve that? And I think it's an area which will be absolutely possible. So this is the kind of thing that I thought I'll very quickly mention. I don't have much time, but thank you very much once again. At my end, I must thank my colleagues and Studio INHAF for managing this. They've been doing this for the last 6 months. And so thank you Radhika, and thank you all of the colleagues who have done this. Thank you very much, Sandeep, for doing this very, very useful and very informative session. And of course, this commitment that we've got to kind of find ways to kind of, get back to understanding what went wrong with cooperatives and how do we kind of, revive the whole spirit of cooperatives and the mode of cooperatives housing in this country. Thank you very much.